she's the introvert, when Barbara started a global health nonprofit and has opened 5 offices around the world. Like, I don't know if a true introvert would do that. And I also think that that's kind of a troublemaker. You're trying to disrupt the status quo, and believe me, you were equal in our trouble.
Well, that's true. I just was quieter, so I kind of flew under the radar.
I love it. Well, if you've read the book, you know that this RNC that you wanted to appear in a clown costume singing Put on a Happy Face.
Yes.
You wanted to perform at the RNC.
Well, I wasn't getting any callbacks, so I tried my grandmother, who also was like, no, you cannot.
Right.
I was like, the convention was coming up. Actually,
We were in 3rd grade.
One of our family members did perform at it, and I think I heard that, and I was like, okay, this is an in. I, too, can perform at it. And I tried to sing Put on a Happy Face from Hello, Dolly, right? Is it from Hello? Oh, no.
Les Mis? No, is that
No,
not?
no.
It's definitely not
You know,
Les Mis.
Put on a Happy Face from, Bye Bye Birdie.
Okay.
Sorry.
Some
Y'all are
musical.
like, we don't care. And anyway, I put on a whole performance, and my grandmother was like, you may not perform. So, no callback there either.
No callback. No success.
No.
You were talking about headlines. We know your father, your grandfather as presidents. Mm-hmm. You were talking about, is it hard to see those headlines because it's dad? You were saying, Barbara, you were at Yale, and you're driving by and you see anti-dad signs, and among the crowd was one of your friends.
Yeah.
How difficult is that?
Well, it got easier. I went away to school. We both were freshmen in college the year that our dad became president. And I chose to go away to school where I didn't know anyone. I loved being out of my comfort zone, and I chose to go to Yale because I wanted to be there, but also it was gratifying to me to know that I could meet new people and kind of establish my own life. But Yale is a really political campus, and it's a very liberal campus. So there's a small chance that I was not a small chance, there's a large chance that I was the only person that voted for my dad there. And I have one friend from Yale, and I can't tell if he's hiding.
He's like,
validating.
I'm like, Hansel, you must have. He's like, no.
But so I really quickly had to realize that the political wasn't personal, and I couldn't take it personal. And if someone was voting for Al Gore, and outside every window of my dorm room, there were Al Gore posters, I couldn't take it personally. It wasn't necessarily against my dad, it was for another person. And I had to learn that right away, because if I didn't, it would have been difficult to deal with as an 18-year-old. You're already quite young at that point. And so I quickly kind of made it not personal. And then I had these incredible friends at Yale who protected me in every way. And that was a really fun part of writing the book, of reflecting on these people that were complete strangers to me when my dad was running for president or going through the recount, who would basically go with me everywhere. I mean, I realized that so much of their friendship was diverting me. I would hear that there would be a march somewhere, and somehow I would never walk by it. And I think so much of that was my friends making sure that I didn't see something that hurt me, that is just so kind and generous. And one of my friends from college is here, and he was a big protector of me, and it's just so sweet and generous, and I'm very grateful.
Me too.
Me too. Do you ever wish you had a normal life? You grew up, and when you guys were born, you had professional photographers snapping away pictures, and you were saying, your grandfather had an inauguration party, and you thought, does everybody's grandfather get an inauguration party, and America just shows up? That was, verbatim what you all said.
But I think the reason why, we did have a normal life. I think that's exactly speaks to that point. We didn't know, that our grandfather was anything special because, one, he didn't act that way. Yeah. This was before the time of smartphones. So when we were with him several times a year, he was totally present. And then I also think our reality, which day to day was in suburban Dallas, Texas, where we rode our bike to our public elementary school. We lived in like a 3-bedroom ranch-style house, was such a juxtaposition from the White House. And that was our day-to-day. That's what we knew. And so we really didn't think anything was different until I think our dad ran for president. And in so much so that we realized when he became president, we were so unprepared for it, all of us. my dad was like, y'all can be normal, go get a margarita. And he didn't tell us to
He
go.
never said that.
He didn't tell us.
He did not say that.
He didn't tell us to. But my point is, he didn't tell us. He didn't tell us to. You're right. You're right. False. He was just like, you can do anything your friends do. It's okay to be you. The truth is, it wasn't okay. And none of us really were prepared for that. And that's because our childhood was so normal. And as Barbara said, we spent more time with our grandparents in far West Texas than we did at the White House. Right. So we do feel like we had a normal childhood.
It seemed normal. One thing that she mentioned is that when you're a little kid, titles don't mean anything. And so I actually thought that everybody's grandfather was president. I thought that was this thing that you became when you were a grandfather.
Oh my goodness.
So when I went to our grandfather's inauguration, we were 7, and the inauguration is real heaven if you're 7. It's a parade, it's confetti, it's glitter, it's balloons. And I was so excited. I went back to our elementary school in Dallas, and I'm thinking this is gonna be great. I have about 20 other inaugurations coming up. I go to school, I wrote a journal article about this entry. I asked my best friend, Catherine Oliver, when her grandfather's inauguration is gonna be. And it was a real letdown, actually, when I realized that there wouldn't be any more.
That is great, that is great. How much time did you actually spend in the White House? Because you were all by then in college. So how much of your time was spent?
When our grandpa was president, we were 7. So we would go maybe once or twice a year for Christmas every year. And then after those 4 years, there were 8-year interim. And then when our dad ran, we were 18. So we were living in dorms or apartments. But we would go at least for the holidays. And Barbara went after September 11th more often because she was in the Northeast.
People want to know the secrets of the White House. You said the White House is home because of the people. The people who you encountered every single day, the past stories, and then you have a great story about when you felt like maybe your cat was playing the piano, but you think it was haunted. So tell us about, feeling like the White House is the White House haunted.
Yes. We know it is. But no, so we first, as I said, our grandfather was 7 and
we were 7.
Oh, we were 7. That would have been very odd if our grandfather was 7, but stranger things have happened. Anyway, so we were 7, and we were at the inauguration parade, and we were freezing because we're from Texas. As I said, we weren't used to East Coast winters, Januaries. And so somehow my mom claims, and she still is standing by this story, even though we're like, Mom, this is not possible, that we left the parade, which takes place blocks away from the White House, by ourselves.
And made it to the White House.
And made it to the White House by ourselves. And I'm like, so were we just like...
You were like, there's a big White House. It's a White House.
We walked by ourselves. I'm like, Mom, we were 7. She's like, we weren't with y'all. And I'm like, okay, but somebody was. She's like, I don't think so. I'm like, you just let 2 7-year-olds, like, before, there was even Google Maps, just walk a couple blocks in Washington, D.C.? She says yes.
She claims that. But anyway.
So, and the truth is, when we walked in, we didn't have anybody with us. Our parents were still at the parade. And so the florist was done, I think, with what she was having to do to get the White House ready for our grandparents. And she said, come to the flower shop and we can make a bouquet. So she did kind of babysit us. And that was our first amazing experience with the people that worked there. Years later, she would do the flowers for my wedding when I married Henry. She's passed away now. But I think, that really shows the people that work there spend their careers there and have become, because we knew them as little girls, and then grew up with them, from 18 to 26, they became like family members to us. And they are what make it a home.
Yeah, definitely. And then it is haunted. And I know that sounds strange. I wouldn't believe it unless I had lived it. In fact, I didn't believe it when Jenna claimed it was haunted.
You can tell the story.
Well, I was asleep one night, and Jenna was in the room next to mine, and she came running in, and she said she heard someone singing opera from the fireplace.
And I was scared.
And I didn't believe her.
And she said, go back to bed. And I said, I'm going to sleep with you. And she was like, please, I'm trying to sleep.
So she got in bed with me. I didn't believe her. Then 2 nights later, we're in Jenna's room. We were both sleeping in there. We were reading. We just fell asleep. And all of a sudden, we heard 1920s jazz music starting to play.
You could almost feel it, though.
It was more like not an actual ghost, it was a moment that we saw and heard. So we both freaked out. We were like, we might need to go get in bed with mom and dad. At this point, we're 24 years old. And we both then convinced ourselves that certainly it must have just been the cat walking on top of the piano. But it was a melody.
Yeah.
So we fell back asleep. We wake up in the morning, the piano is closed.
I leave and I see Buddy, who's one of the men who's worked at the White House the longest, who we adored. And I said, Buddy, you're not going to believe what we heard last night. And I told him, and he goes, Jenna, you wouldn't believe the things I'd heard over the last 35 years. And I'm like, so is it haunted? He's like, definitely. I'm like,
But he never actually told you stories, or did he?
no, because I had to go to work. But and I
And I will say that Condoleezza Rice last week agreed that it was haunted.
Condoleezza Rice. I mean, she's
We're like,
rational.
she's a doctor. Yeah. She's a PhD.
You guys are awesome.
But she agreed. She felt moments herself.
It was friendly, though.
Whoever
Always.
it was.
Whoever it
Whoever
was friendly.
came with all good intentions.
Right. So you all had to use fake names to travel or to, what to do a lot of things. Barbara 2.0 is what you refer to yourself, Barbara Bush 2.0 at some points in the book, because you're trying to make phone calls, order things, and no one really takes you seriously. They think you're prank calling because it's like, I'm Barbara Bush. And
Yes.
No, poor Barbara.
Well, I love my name.
Do you love your name?
I love my name.
Okay, good.
There were just a number of sort of hilarious mishaps throughout my life because of my name. Is it the name Barbara? Is that what's making you laugh?
Okay, go
There's
ahead.
some audience members that are laughing at my name. See,
No.
this is what I've dealt with. So again, I didn't get it as a little kid. So I would call and order Domino's for us, and I would be about 8, and I'd think I was really responsible and mature ordering pizza for the family. And then someone would answer, and I'd say, it's Barbara, who's the pizza for? Barbara Bush? Hang up on me. And I didn't know why. This has continued to be the case. About 2 years ago, I show up to give a speech about Global Health Corps, which is the organization that I run. And I'm thinking, certainly the person that's organized this event will find me. I'm sort of floating around. And a woman comes up to me and she says, so you're her intern? And I'm thinking, I'm like, well, I don't have an intern here. They thought my grandmother was coming to give the speech.
Also, it's just been the cause for so many hilarious moments, and I'm sorry since there's some gentlemen here, but I have to tell this story.
It needs to be told.
It needs to be told. Our cousin Wendy, who's actually
It's in the book.
a second cousin, which means she doesn't feel that comfortable. She feels comfortable with our grandmother, but not as comfortable.
It's more formal.
More formal. Writes an email to Barbara, thinking it's to Barbara, that says, yo, what up?
Is the first line. And then the whole email, I don't know why she sent this to me, is essentially asking for advice on whether she should get a bikini wax, get laser hair removal, should she consider electrolysis. She fires it off. But it auto-filled my grandmother's email address, not mine, and went to my grandmother. And my grandmother didn't even bat an eyelash. She replied. She said she doesn't wax, she doesn't do electrolysis, she recommends staying far, far away from harsh products like Nair, and she can't wait to see Wendy in Maine that summer.
And when I sent my grandmother the book, I was scared, first of all, because I wrote a chapter on her which included a letter that the postscript she was mad at me, basically, and the postscript of the letter said, do not show this letter to anyone.
And then Jenna published it.
So I was scared of her reaction, and I was like, oh no, what is she gonna say? But she wrote back and she's like, I liked the book, and I'm like, great. She's like, but why did Barbara not include the waxing story? And then I'm like, oh no, she hasn't read the book, and she's actually gonna get to my chapter and be furious. And then she's like, never mind, I just read more, and I realized she did put in the waxing story. Good, I'm glad
she was like, people really like humor.
Did you get a lot of feedback from them writing it, or did you just write it and then cross your fingers and hope that
Well, with our grandmother, we wrote it and crossed our fingers.
But both of our parents edited the book, not content-wise.
Okay.
We didn't take anything out of the book, but they both really took their job seriously as editors. My dad edited it twice.
Mainly, he's like, this sentence is too wordy. I'm like, all right, Dad. I'll make it 2 sentences. They're like diligent, avid readers who want it to be a well-written book. It wasn't about content, which is good. They let us write whatever we wanted.
Everything, yeah. So Jenna, you and I are family.
Yes.
The NBC
family.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
you-
you.
we can
There's
do
a
a
couple
round of
of people
applause.
here that watch
Can
NBC.
we clap? Can we clap? No, so our show starts at 4:30, ends at 7, and then you all take over the Today Show.
Yes.
And so that's how I'm going to say. We're family, NBC
Good.
family.
I like that.
So because you say you felt like a safari animal running away from the media growing up, and now you are the media. So what made you...
That's a very strange turn.
Yeah.
Well, if you had told me 15 years ago, I've worked for the Today Show for 7 years now, or 8 years, maybe even 9 years. I don't know. I need to do the math, but I was at the Vancouver Olympics. Somebody do the math. And I love working there. One of my producers from work is here tonight, who I adore working with. And I do feel like I have this great group of women in particular that I get to work with, which is so much fun. But one of the first things that Amy Robach, who used to work with us and now works on Good Morning America, and Savannah told me was that they were at my wedding. They were like, the reporters at my wedding trying to get a scoop, which is hilarious because now I work with them, but I'm also friendly with both of them. And I think, that turn was interesting, but I do think it helps me do my job. I mean, I know what it's like to be interviewed quite often. So I know when somebody is thoughtful and kind and doesn't just read a stereotype or read one article and then takes everything from that there's like an open-mindedness to it. So it's important to me that I do that in my work too.
Well, we appreciate you. I mean, you do a great job.
Oh, thank you.
And that's how people have really been able to get to know you. They love your personality and they can relate.
Thanks.
Barbara, you call yourself a professional wanderer because, I mean, obviously heading up a large organization, a global health organization. Do you ever wish that you didn't live out of a suitcase, or what drives you and wakes you up every morning?
I do live out of a suitcase, but I love living out of a suitcase, and I'm very used to it. I also never thought that I would work in global health. I thought I would be an architect, and that's what I planned on being ever since I was young. And I was really lucky, and one of the really incredible things that our parents gave to us was the chance to travel the world with them and travel across our country with them. And especially because we were in college and right out of college when our dad was president, that's really when you're trying to figure out how you want to be in the world and what you want to do. And so during the summer of my junior year, I was working in design in New York that summer, and I took 2 weeks off of my summer internship, and I got to travel with my parents for the launch of PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and all of y'all are responsible for it, but you may not know that as taxpayers. And at the time, if you were living on the continent of Africa, no matter how wealthy you were or how well connected you were, if you were HIV positive, you could not get access to the drugs that you needed to live because pharmaceutical companies wouldn't distribute them there. And so you might remember headlines. At that time, millions of people were dying, but the prediction was that tens to hundreds of millions of people would die in a short amount of time. And so PEPFAR would provide free drugs for people living with HIV. And so I traveled with my parents. The first place we landed was in Uganda, and it was such a stark contrast for me. We landed, and there were hundreds of people waiting in the streets for drugs that we'd had in the United States for years. And I was so angered by that notion that these drugs existed. And my mom and I went to one of the clinics where the drugs were being distributed, and another Ugandan mother came with her daughter. And she had dressed her daughter up in obviously one of her fancier dresses. It was a lavender and white Katenge dress, and I just was standing near them and started talking and said to the mom, your daughter's so beautiful, is she 3? And she said something like, no, she's 7. And she wasn't little because she was young, she was little because she was sick. And it was by no fault of her own. And I just had this very defining moment where I was standing with my own mother. This little girl was with her mom, and she was born at the wrong place at the wrong time, basically. She was born in Uganda and by no fault of her own, and I was born in the right place at the right time. I was born in the United States. If I wasn't healthy, I would have easily had the drugs that I needed. And so I became obsessed with global health issues. And by the way, flash forward, 15 million people are alive because of PEPFAR. And then I quit which is great. I quit working in or quit even considering pursuing a job in design because I still feel this way every day, and this is what wakes me up every morning. It's so lucky that we live in a time where we don't need a scientist in a lab to come up with the drugs that we need. They already exist, and the information exists, and the education exists. We just need to figure out how to use these tools to serve others well. And so Global Health Corps is based on the Teach for America model, but we mobilize young leaders, and they serve with us for a year solving health issues in poor communities, and then throughout the year they go through our training focused on advocacy and policy and entrepreneurship so that they can continue working in this space throughout their lives. And I've gotten to work with 1,000 incredible young leaders. And what wakes me up is them, knowing that they would prefer to be doing this work than anything else. And this year we received 12,000 applications for our new class of 150 fellows. So that's what makes me hopeful every day. People often say, man, it must be depressing to work in global health. And for me, while the challenges are huge, it's anything but, knowing so many people want to work in this space and knowing that we already have the tools we need. Now we just need to be creative. So I love living out of a suitcase because that's how I get to spend my life.
Yeah. You're doing amazing things, giving hope and inspiring us all. Yeah. So I think I'm going to open it up for questions because we have about maybe 10 minutes or so. So I know I was talking to some of you out there waiting in line, and you were eager to find out a lot of things about the Bush sisters. So if anybody has any questions, we have a microphone right here in the middle where you can just walk up. First come, first serve style, so.
Hi.
There you go. So I have 2-year-old twin boys.
Oh,
I think twins are like the coolest thing ever. In your book, you said your mom never compared you to.
Yeah.
What other advice would you give to a twin mom?
Well, that is the best advice. She didn't compare us. Neither of our parents did. And now that I'm a mom, I see how easy it would be to say, like, Jenna, don't do that, or Barbara doesn't do that. There was none of that. And I think that's really lucky because it allowed us to find our own way. They also really nurtured the things that we were good at, and they encouraged us to find those things without sort of comparing us and allowing us to be as different as we were.
I'd say that, and then they also definitely split us up when we were young, which was hard, but it really gave us the confidence that we could make friends wherever we were without each other, which I think was really good for us.
We went to different camps, but I was so homesick for Barbara the first year that I wrote a letter, and I was like, "Dear Mom and Dad, I have tons of friends." And then the next letter was like, "Dear Mom and Dad, the first letter was a lie. I don't have any friends." But don't worry, the first year was rocky. It got better.
You got through it. Next question for us.
Thank you for making it to Miami and braving our traffic.
Sure.
I love your dad's painting, and I would love to know if he has tried to paint you guys yet.
Funny you should ask.
Okay, I think you should read your section, and I'll tell my thought of this.
Okay.
He painted Barbara. That's all I can say. He has not painted me, no. And then I showed him pictures. I'm like, "What about this one?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "You won't paint this picture of me?" He's like, "Too much hair." I'm like, "Too much hair?" And then I'm like, "What about this one?" He's like, "I'd have to zoom way in." And then he zoomed way in. I'm like, "Never mind, I don't want you to paint that." There was something I learned from reading Barbara's chapter that gave me a little pause. Can you find it?
I'm trying to find it.
Okay, there, it's right there. I saw the emoji.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
So he has painted me.
Okay,
and,
I've already said it.
I saw it last week, and I was very pleased with it.
Why
Anyway,
would you ever try to rub it in? Go ahead.
no, I just thought he's a great painter. I thought he did a great job.
Okay, go ahead.
This is actually on a different subject, but about our dad.
But about the same subject. Go ahead.
Okay. When I had my first devastating heartbreak in my early 30s, I'd ride the subway, wondering if anyone could see that inside my chest, my heart was torn in two. And when my heart hurt so badly, I couldn't help but wonder how many other people riding the subway felt the same. How many others were wandering the city with broken hearts. My dad was the first person I called after that breakup. I don't know why. I never shared much about my relationships with him. I'm private like my mother. But through it all, struggling to hold the belief that someone could be wonderful while also understanding you shouldn't build the rest of your life with them, I relied on my dad. And daily he would call or text, just to check in, just to share the burden with me. He didn't make promises of things getting better or the relationship ultimately working out. He just shared that while my heart hurt now, it would not always feel that way. Every morning, I would wake to a text from him just saying his usual, "Love you, baby," and in a small way affirming that heartbreak hurts and that is okay. I picked up the pieces, but he never stopped texting every morning. Every night, I read a meditation, a short modern-day interpretation of a Christian Bible verse meant as a form of silent prayer before I doze off. And every morning, he rereads the same meditation from the same book, texting me the verse, which he has illustrated by emojis. I text back my own emoji picture. It is short and it is daily. 5:30 a.m. Texas time, 6:30 a.m. New York time, waiting there for me when I open my eyes. It is so simple, and yet it is everything.
Now, it is really sweet, but I read this and I was like, wait a minute. You wake up to a text from Dad every day? And she was like, yes. I was like, so every single morning? And she's like, yes. And so we were speaking at the library, and I was like, Dad, I don't even get one once a week. So there's a theme here. There's a favorite child. I still love him, and he still loves me, but there's a favorite.
Do you want to unpack that on the stage?
No, I think we'll unpack it over the Thanksgiving Day table.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good evening. I'm a dad of twin girls who were also born on November 25th, a few years after you. So my wife and I read the book over the weekend and really enjoyed it. My wife, I think she's almost through it. And my question goes to some of the women in your life. What characteristics of your two grandmothers and your mom do you feel you emulate or admire as you live your own respective lives?
Such a thoughtful question. It is. Well, growing up, I write a little bit about how our mom, how you don't realize as a child that your parents have had these full lives before you arrived, and that a lot of what I think you parent, and I realize now I'm a mom based on everything that's come before. Some of who I am is, some of the way I decide to be with my kids is because of 29, 30 years before they were born. And we didn't really get that as teenagers with our mom. So a lot of times she wouldn't understand us sharing clothes, for example, with friends because she was an only child. And we realized in writing this that the inverse of twins is an only child. And so recently we were just with her and I said, and a friend asked her, she goes, "Did you ever feel left out?" And my mom said, "I still do." And I think, I notice with my girls, they'll kind of gang up on me. They're 3 and 4, 2 and 4, but they still have the power to gang up on me this early. Like, I'll be like, "Please don't drink the bathwater," and then they'll both do it. And I realized that we must have done that for years, and that I understand it because I did it with my sister. I'm like, oh, that's just a sisterhood thing. And our mom always loved us, even through when it was probably difficult. And I think that unconditional love was what was most important. So I hope to do that with my girls. She also had she has a really calm way about her to where like sometimes it was frightening. We're like, "Mom, there's an emergency," and she'd be like, "It's okay, no need to worry." And that's a really lovely way to be parented because it never made us worry about the small things. So I hope, and then my grandmother, I love my grandmother. I have a little bit of her mouth. So I'm trying to and I like that, but I'm trying to be a little bit more like my mom in the graceful way, but still funny. But if I could be still funny, but a little bit more graceful, that's what I'm working on in 2018.
Well, good. You can start earlier on your New Year's resolutions.
Oh, thank you.
I think, so my mom's mom we write a lot about in the book, and she was not formally educated, and she's kind of a pioneer woman. She lives in Midland and grew up in the desert, and she is extremely curious and self-taught, and though she never really left Midland, Texas, she was such a dreamer, and so I learned so much about the world from her, and in fact, the, what's it called?
Subtitle.
The subtitle, sorry.
This is like day 20 of our book tour. We're hanging in there by a thread.
The subtitle of our book is called Stories from Our Wild and Wonderful Life. And when we were little in Midland, it was about 120 degrees during the day because it's the desert. And so we wouldn't play outside that much during the day. And my mom would feed us dinner. We would take showers and get in our nightgowns. And at night, she would take us over to my grandmother's. And my grandmother would spread a blanket out in her front yard. And we would all lay out there, my sister, my mom, my grandmother, and I. And my grandmother had taught herself all the constellations, and she knows everything about nature. And so she would point out all the stars in the sky and really encouraged us to dream and think bigger, which I really do attribute a lot to my desire to explore the world. And she would read us poetry, which as 4-year-olds we didn't always totally get, but one poem that we loved was called The Summer Day by Mary Oliver. And it ends with, doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And we always loved that poem, and that's why we use this as our subtitle. But that's my grandmother's curiosity and desire to explore, even if you don't get to leave your home, but through reading and learning is something that I hope to continue to emulate. And then on our mom's side, on our dad's side, our grandmother has always used her voice. And I think that that's something that's really inspiring. And in writing the book, we learned a lot about her through research just because we were too young at the time. It was surprising to us to find out that when she was the wife of the president, a Republican president, she had come out as pro-choice. And we didn't know that because we were too young to even understand what that meant. But, she really does believe in using her voice if it's on issues she cares about.
Next question.
These are going to be our 2 last questions of the night.
Oh.
Hi, Jen, I'm sorry to ignore you for a moment.
Oh,
But
it's
Barbara,
okay.
this is kind of a dream come true for me because for 15 years I had hoped to have a chance to talk to you. If I could compliment you on being genuine, your friend Matt introduced you to my son Josh when you were younger.
Oh my gosh, Josh Shore.
Yes, I'm his dad. And I just wanted to share with everybody, if you don't mind, I won't embarrass you, I promise. You were so genuine. What happened was Josh came home one day and said, hey, Dad, do you mind if we're not home for the holidays? And I said, why? And he said, well, I'm going to be spending time with Barbara Bush and her friends. And I said, I thought, it was a coincidence of names. And I teased him. And I said, oh, you mean the elderly lady with the white hair? And, no, her granddaughter. And I said, oh, my gosh, are you kidding me? And he did. He went down to the house. And I just got to tell you, he had a wonderful weekend, came back with some very funny stories, and it was like being with a regular family. I was kind of stunned. And then what stunned me even more was he said, why don't you join me and Barbara with their friends up in New York? So Rosie and I went up to New York.
Yeah.
And the one thing I remember is being in Carnegie Deli, and everybody was sort of dancing around, trying to be polite. And they served a corned beef sandwich that was the size of a basketball. And as I say, I don't mean to embarrass you, but you were so genuine, and everybody was trying to be delicate with a fork and a knife, and you said, for God's sake, we have to eat, and you ripped the darn thing and gave everybody a piece. So I just wanted to thank you for being a wonderful young lady, and you haven't changed a bit from 15 years ago. You look like the same person.
Tell Josh hi. Thank you.
Barbara's like, where is this going? Where is this? A story about
I was
me?
like, do y'all date? I have so many questions. I have so many questions to ask you when we're done, but
Tell Josh I said hi. It's good to
was
see
he
you.
the one that got away? No.
No.
Okay.
Oh, no, but I love him.
All right. We'll have to discuss this later, but
Hello.
oh, I like your shirt.
Thank you. First of all, I really want to thank you for your service, what you do to make world better place. Both of you are exceptional human beings. And second, I'm a twin. I have a twin sister, and she lives in Croatia. And I was just wondering, sometimes I wake up and I don't feel really good, and I ask myself, I mean, why I'm feeling this way? And then I call my sister, and then she tells me how she had a very bad day. And I just like, even she's so far away, I can feel sometimes when she's not good or whatever. So I was wondering if you guys sometimes feel the same way.
Oh, that's so sweet. And I know it's hard being away from her. We feel lucky. Well, shall I end with this?
Sure.
This is the end of our book, which will answer that question, I promise. The world has often compared Barbara and me, but our parents never did. I realize now how easy it would be to quip, Jenna, your sister never acts that way. Your sister doesn't impulsively kick a soccer ball into our front window. Or why don't you make A's like your sister? And because of that, the bond we shared from before birth was solidified. I was never jealous of Barbara, and she was never jealous of me. Although I should have been jealous or envious of her near-perfect SAT score. Her successes were my successes. Her heartbreaks were also mine. Recently, Melinda Gates, Barbara's ultimate girl crush, tweeted an article about Barbara. I was riding the subway and saw the tweet during a brief respite with Wi-Fi, and I wanted to yell out to the passengers, see, my sister is a global health star. Even Melinda Gates knows she's saving the world. When people stop me and inquire about my more elusive sister, they typically ask, is she married? I understand their curiosity, but internally I beg them to ask about what she's doing. I want to tell them about the work she does, about the nonprofit she started all by herself, about all that she's accomplished. Which, by the way, this was very interesting talking with Condi Rice. Even Condoleezza Rice, people will ask her why she's not married. And I feel like since we are almost in 2018, that should be a question that we do away with. And recently, I did just that. This is when I'm like my grandmother. A woman in an event asked me in a worried tone, now why isn't your sister married? I took a deep breath, but obviously not deep enough, and I responded, she is married to her work, Global Health Corps. You can Google it. Oh, and she has a nice boyfriend too. Was it too extreme? Maybe, but that's what sisters do. They want the best for each other. They always protect each other. Not too long ago, I picked up Mila, which I know is a Croatian name, by the way, this is my daughter, from her preschool. She smiled her wide smile and said, Mama, oh, I'm gonna cry. A word I will never tire of hearing. Where is Poppy? I want Poppy Lou. I picked her up and held her, inhaling her silky hair, smelling school on her, paste, paint, and oranges. It made me long for my sister the way she longed for hers. I remembered walking into new schools, meeting new kids together, walking into spaces where we felt out of place, hands entwined. As I walked Mila home, I thought of my sister now all grown up. She was in Africa. What was she doing? Preparing for bed? Was she staring into the Rwandan sky, looking at other stars that created a different pattern from the one we would soon see muted by the brilliant lights of Manhattan? That night, I held my girls closely and listened to the patterns of their breathing until they were in sync, until they were one. You have each other, I thought to myself. You can walk through this wild and wonderful life together. You will fight, yes, and you will adapt to each other's quirks, but you will do it together. You will make your sister feel like she is enough. And for me, your mama, well, that is enough. More than enough. That is everything. So I hope that answers your question.
I'm putting my eye. Thank you guys so much. I know you've been doing this book tour for so long, but every answer that you give, you have been, giving the same answer and the same questions, but it's done with such authenticity. Oh. And that is what we appreciate about you. So if you have not been able to pick up the book or read it yet, it is incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sisters, everybody.
Thank you, guys. And thanks to our cousin, Jebby, for being a brother first. Yes. And Sandra. Thank you so much.
There's a little photo opportunity afterwards.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Shelley, Jenna, and Barbara, for a marvelous evening. Thank you again. Also, What we're going to do now is all the books that you purchase are signed by them already. But if you purchase a book, you'll be able to meet and greet them and have a picture taken with them over in the autographing area. Thank you all for coming.